Hello everybody, good morning and welcome to That's Football. We're talking Premier League, inductee, Hall of Famers, whatever they want to do it. I mean, look, it's not Super League, so I think we can relax a little bit. But basically, the Premier League have announced their first two inductees into the Premier League Hall of Fame this morning. I think it's wrong, but I think football's all about opinion, so we'll get into that in a minute. But the first two, and we must congratulate them, is Thierry Henry and Alan Shearer. They are the first two inductee Hall of Famers for the Premier League. So this is basically awarded to players across Premier League history who have made a massive contribution to the Premier League, in effect. There are other factors to it, but that's basically it. And you have to have retired before August the 1st, 2020. So Wayne Rooney can't be part of that. That's straight away. I would put Rooney in ahead of Shearer straight away, but Rooney can't be part of that because he was still playing for Derby County. So the argument about Rooney isn't right. Thierry Henry, Thierry Henry is one of the best players the Premier League's ever had. I can't really argue with Thierry Henry as a Hall of Famer, and I can't really argue with him being one of the two. And look, I do want to say well done to Alan Shearer. I'd certainly have you as a consideration, all-time Premier League goal scorer. But, I mean, I've got to say it's a little bit bland. I mean, to be honest, I'm just going to be honest. And some people will say bitter, salty, cry more, all that lot. Of course, that's what football's all about. But football is also about opinion. And Alan Shearer today, I don't want to take anything away from him. Well done. But I think you're just a Gareth Southgate, England manager. Like, this is why I think this as a country, England always fails. Because we go for the thumbs up politically right in the footballing world. Oh, that's a safe choice. No one can argue with that. A little bit grey, a little bit Gareth Southgate in charge of England, Alan Shearer as one of the first inductees. And I think that, if this is something new we're going to do, and I quite like it. I know it's a bit American, but I do quite like the Hall of Famer thing. I think to not put, and I'm obviously biased, but to not put a Manchester United player in the first two, when Manchester United, and we're talking Premier League, Manchester United have dominated the Premier League. It was us and Arsenal at the start. Well, it wasn't even us and Arsenal at the start. It was us and people like Blackburn and stuff like that. And then it was Arsenal. We saw them off. And then we've had the Chelsea thing. We saw them off. Then we had a bit with Man City. You could say they saw us off. But Manchester United's history with the Premier League is huge. And I just think that there are better options than Alan Shearer as the first two. I think Shearer should have come in maybe third, fourth or fifth. I'm not saying he's not a consideration. He definitely is, and I'm certainly congratulating him. But I'm just saying that Shearer and Thierry Henry as the first two, it just feels a little bit bland. It feels a little bit grey. It feels a little bit like the football authorities go. They go with these bland people who, Roy Keane, most decorated Premier League captain in Premier League history. Why not Roy Keane? There are other options. I mean, Cristiano Ronaldo played in the Premier League. He's still playing. I've just realised he's not retired. We can't put him in. So Ronaldo's fair enough. But Frank Lampard scored more goals in the Premier League than Thierry Henry from midfield. So Frank Lampard as well. Gerrard, Vieira, Aguero scored a lot of goals. Now look, people are going to say you're clutching at straws here. Cantona. One that does ring to mind, though, and I will get in there early, I wouldn't put Ryan Giggs ahead of Roy Keane. I wouldn't put Ryan Giggs ahead of a couple of other Manchester United players. So people are saying it would have been Giggs, but obviously the stuff that's going on in his private life, I get that. There's no way you can have Ryan Giggs stood there with a Premier League Hall of Famer at the moment with what's going on. I get that. Innocent until proven guilty, which is always important, but those charges do... And literally 2 days ago he was charged, so you cannot put Ryan Giggs in there. Which again is why I think they go with people like Shearer and Henry, because they're a safe pair of hands as Premier League inductees, aren't they? And look, as I said, I do congratulate them, but I want to ask is who would be your top five? Who would be your top five Premier League Hall of Fame inductees as the first five that are going to get it? Because for me, I do put Thierry Henry in there. I definitely put Roy Keane in there. Obviously, I know that they've got to have retired, so I can't put Ronaldo or Rooney in there. So I'd have Thierry Henry. I'd have Roy Keane. I'd probably have Frank Lampard because of the goals. I would have Frank Lampard in there, and he's won Premier Leagues as well. I mean, that's unlucky for Gerrard because he hasn't. So I'd have Henry, Keane and Lampard as my top three. I probably would put Shearer in there. I'm not saying he'd be my fourth, but I probably would put Shearer in there. And as the fifth choice, I'd probably go for something a little bit, maybe out of the box a little bit. Maybe go for a Cantona or something like that, because everything seems to be sort of like from the noughties. Like, what about the 90s? Like, the 90s was arguably well, Roy Keane. Obviously, Roy Keane's one there, but I think a Cantona would be good. You've got people. There are other candidates, but not in my top three. I think my top three would be Henry, Keane, and Lampard for different reasons. I mean, look, people say, "Are you admitting that Lampard's better than Scholes?" No, I'm not. I'm not admitting that. I'm just being a little bit fair about inductees into Hall of Fames. I think Roy Keane definitely, because he's won most and was an amazingly influential player in Premier League history. Obviously, Henry for the class. I mean, I think Henry's would be competitive. I think Ronaldo would battle and Rooney would battle Henry, but both are still playing, so I get that. And then Lampard, because people say, well, you're putting Lampard in there for the goals, but he scored them from midfield and won a lot of Premier League titles, and he's arguably the best attacking midfielder in Premier League history. So I would put Lampard, Keane, and Thierry Henry as my top three, and they're all retired and they're all available, and they go with Alan Shearer. And I just think the Alan Shearer one for me is wrong. It makes me feel, for some reason, it just makes me feel a little bit let down, because I don't think that advertises the best of the Premier League. I think it's a bit dull. Oh, look, here's our two first inductees, Alan Shearer and Thierry Henry, and I just want to look at what's the next bit of news on Sky. It's just bland. It's like, oh yeah, well done. And I do mean well done. I genuinely, I've just put Shearer in my top five. But as the first two, I'm a little bit like, I'm not standing up and clapping. I'm like, whereas I think if they'd given it to Roy Keane or Lampard, I would have gone, you know what? They've thought that through. They've actually thought that through. I feel that Keane and Lampard are more representative of the Premier League than Thierry Henry and Alan Shearer anyway. Alan Shearer did win a Premier League with Blackburn, but it was one season, and Leicester won it one year. We're going to give it to Vardy. I think Shearer scored a lot of goals in the Premier League, but and he was a fantastic complete striker, and I would say Shearer is probably the best out and out striker the Premier League's ever had. But other people score. I mean, Aguero, Andy Cole, they've scored a lot of goals. So would I put Andy Cole or Aguero in my top five? No. I'm only putting Shearer in there for the goals, really, because he scored a few more. And I think he was more of a complete striker. But Thierry Henry, very good player, one of the best players that has played in the Premier League, so you can't argue with that. But I just think Lampard and Roy Keane, I think I would have gone with Lampard and Roy Keane as my first two, to be fair. But I can't argue with Henry. But what I'm saying is I just think that Keane and Lampard, if they'd have been announced this morning, I would have gone, you know what? Well done, Premier League, or whoever voted this through, because I think they represent the Premier League really, really well in relation to. It just makes me. I think about what they achieved in the Premier League, and I think, wow, you know what? A midfielder to score all those goals, and the captain, to win all those titles and be a massive part of why we won it for the greatest team that's ever played in the Premier League. I just think it represents it better. But I'm sure I've opened up a can of worms here, and I'm sure people will disagree, and I'm sure people will agree, and I'm sure people will have different options, and that's the wonder of this channel, and that's the wonder of of being a football fan, really. So do put in your if you want to put your top five in, put your top five in, but definitely put your top three in. Do you agree with Henry and Shearer being the first two? And some people will say, oh, it ain't that deep. It ain't that deep. These other players you mentioned, they'll get it at some point. But I just think, well, it is a little bit deep, because these are the first two. These are the people that represent the first two awards. And I just think it could have been more iconic. But what I will say is, whether Ryan Giggs was a consideration or not, if it had been Giggs and Henry, I would have disagreed with it. I don't think Giggs should get it before Keane, Lampard anyway. I would go with those two, because I just think that there's different. Ryan Giggs is the most decorated player, isn't it? He's won the most Premier League titles, so you can understand why that would be. And he would definitely be in my sort of top 10 easily. But I just think that as things stand at the moment, I wouldn't have gone with Shearer and Henry. I think just Shearer's just a bit too. I don't think Alan Shearer deserves to be in the top two Premier League players of all time, and that's what they're basically saying. Alan Shearer is the second most iconic player in Premier League history. Not for me, and that's basically the sentence. Is Alan Shearer the second most iconic player in Premier League history? No, he's not. So why is he getting it? There are at least 3-4 players that should get it ahead of him. But I congratulate him. You know, I've got nothing against Alan Shearer. I think he's a little bit bland, but as a player, but. You know, he is the all-time Premier League top scorer. And many people who defend him will say, oh, you know, he does deserve it. I get that. It's all about opinion. But for me, it should have been Henry and Keane or Henry and Lampard. Or even, actually, I probably would have gone Keane and Lampard, but that probably would have been a bit controversial. But look, well done to Thierry Henry. Well done to Alan Shearer. I don't agree with it. What do you think? Get in the video description. I would have gone... definitively, just to say, I would have gone Henry and Roy Keane. That's what I would have gone with as my first two. Lampard would have been the reserve. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure you smash a like on the video, subscribe, bottom right hand corner, and FIFA Career Mode is back this afternoon, just before 4 o'clock. Looking forward to that. Get your comments in below.